And now it's my distinct and great pleasure to introduce our graduation speaker, Leana Hosea. Leana Hosea joined the BBC World Service in 2004 as a broadcast assistant and worked her way up to multimedia reporter and producer. She has been stationed in numerous overseas BBC bureaus, including Brussels during the 2016 terror attacks there. Leana has also covered the uprisings across the Middle East. She was in Tahrir Square from day one of the revolution, following that story until the bloody crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood. From her base in Dubai, she shot, edited, and reported her own stories across the region, including filming inside Qatar's World Cup squalid labor camps. Her documentary work includes Rhino Wars, which features poachers speaking openly about their trade. Before joining the BBC, Hosea worked in international development for environmental publications and as a teaching assistant in Japan. She graduated with a degree in politics and international affairs at the University of Wales, Swansea. During the 2016-17 academic year, Leana is one of 21 Knight-Wallace Fellows here at the University of Michigan. Hosted here at U of M, the Knight-Wallace Fellowships for Journalists is one of the most prestigious programs of this kind. While in residence as a Knight-Wallace Fellow, she's been researching clean water issues, comparing the African American and Native American experiences. Leana is now making a documentary film on the water crises in Flint, Michigan, and the Navajo Nation, including Standing Rock. Her film follows the story of a few ordinary Americans in Flint, Michigan, and on the Navajo Nation who are struggling for truth and solutions to their illnesses. These stories come together in Standing Rock around the water. I'm not going to give away the ending. I don't know the ending, actually. Leana Hosea is, in other words, a lifelong scholar and a wonderful exemplar of and an inspiringly dedicated and effective advocate for international studies. And we're absolutely thrilled to have her here to give the commencement speech at our PICS graduation ceremony. Leana. You want this? Oh, no, you're
Thank you very much, Robert. I don't know the ending either. And also, thank you, Adedolapo, because that was a great speech, and you're a hard act to follow. I will try. Family, friends, faculty, and the International Studies, Michigan University, class of 2017, it's an honor to be with you here today. The exams, the stress, the blood, sweat, and tears are over. You've graduated. So give yourselves a round of applause. You're probably suffering from a hangover right now. But too bad. You have to listen to me for the next 20 minutes. While here at the University of Michigan, you've mastered some important life skills. In lectures, you've got the art of looking rapturously engaged while actually being asleep. I can see you're putting that into practice right now. Some among you may have learned lessons like how to down a pint in 30 seconds, crucial to impress your new boss in those upcoming after-work drinks. But apart from partying, you're also thinking, well, what's next? What's next? You're out of the world of academia and research and into the world of work. You've now got two paths ahead of you. One leads to a soul-crushing job as a cog in the corporate machine, slowly paying off those student debts. And the other leads to living in your parents' basement. Maybe they'll pay off your student debts. I'm here to help you navigate these exciting opportunities. I have to say, I didn't get my job in the BBC as a reporter and producer straight out of university. And I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do either. Some people do, of course, walk straight into their dream jobs, but it took me a little bit longer, so don't worry if you haven't worked it all out yet. Before joining the BBC, at the very bottom of the heap, I worked as a teacher in Japan, a press officer in international development, and a writer for a tiny environment magazine where they paid so little, I lived in a flat with no heating, where I could see my breath in the morning. But it was all a good test of finding out my true passions. Well, that's a story I'm sticking to in this speech. I remember being in an interview for a job in public relations, and at the end, the interviewer said to me, "You don't really want this job, do you?" I now know that this was a trick question, that he hadn't really seen into my soul and discovered the truth. So I was candid and I said, "No, I don't." Needless to say, I didn't get that job. But thank goodness, because I would have been miserable. So my advice is to stick to your guns and go for what you want in life. And don't worry if it takes time. Just don't give up on your dreams. Nothing is really over until you stop trying. Through interviewing people, I've come to realize that often the ones who achieve their dreams in life are not the ones who never fail, but the ones who remain positive whatever life throws at them. They pick themselves up and they keep going. I remember I interviewed this American Olympic long-distance runner called Lopez Lemong during the London Olympics in 2012. He wasn't always American. He was born in Darfur in Sudan in a small village. One day when he was at school, he heard gunfire. Rebels, who were meant to be protecting the Darfuris against the government, attacked the village to steal children to fight in their militia. Lopez was only 6 at the time, and he was kidnapped along with some other boys and taken far away for training. Not too long after the kidnap, one of the older boys hatched a plot to escape and said Lopez should come. That night, the boys managed to crawl in between the legs of the soldiers in the dark as they stood about drinking, and then they started running, literally running for their lives. They thought they were running home, but instead, several days later, they ended up in Kenya and were taken to a refugee camp. Lopez spent years in the refugee camp, and there wasn't much to eat. So to take his mind off the hunger, he would run around the camp. One day, he got to see the Olympics on TV, and he saw Michael Johnson win the 400 meters for the USA. And he said to himself, one day, I'm going to run that race for that country. And against all the odds, that's exactly what he did. He managed to come to America as one of the lost boys of Sudan and ended up meeting Michael Johnson and running the Olympics for the United States. It's such an inspiring story that dreams can come true if you believe in them enough. Though for sure, the dreaming is the easy part. Making them happen, that's much harder. It takes commitment, time, desire, courage, and faith in yourself. Try not to doubt yourself. It can be hard. I still suffer from feelings of, what on earth am I doing here? I feel it right now. If you're feeling those moments of self-doubt, maybe at work, when you're not sure if that idea that you're going to put across sounds wrong or you're going to make a fool of yourself, just go for it anyway, because remember, everyone else in the room feels the same way you do, even your boss. That's something I've learned at the BBC in our daily pitching meetings. And it's something I think women in particular can struggle with a little more than men. So just remember, everyone is fronting, so just do the same. As international studies students, I assume you all want to go, or many of you will be looking to work abroad. And I can't recommend it enough. I've been lucky to do it myself for many years. And all I can say is that you never know where you're going to end up or what's going to happen next. Maybe the guys among you will find yourselves at the full moon party in Thailand, getting cozy with a beautiful woman, until you realize she's actually a man. Oh well, what happens in Thailand stays in Thailand. Or ladies, you might be trekking up to Machu Picchu in Peru when that cute guy gives you some strange leaves to chew on. It's okay, it's for medicinal, spiritual purposes. But I'm sure you'll learn some more meaningful lessons too. In the winter of 2011, I was posted to Cairo as the Middle East producer. I'd been to Cairo I'd been to Egypt several times before throughout the years. And I always thought the country was a pressure cooker about to explode under the oppression that they endured. But for years, it didn't. So the last thing I expected to happen was the revolution. About 6 weeks after my posting, I was checking my Facebook, and the call for the uprising popped up on my feed. I called London. I think the revolution might start on the 25th of January. I said, when are those people going to learn that you can't organize a revolution on Facebook, my editor said. But go out and do a piece anyway. So the morning of the 25th, we drove out and found a small opposition protest, and I began to film. Then I saw many more people coming out on the streets. Some were just stopping and watching, while others were actually joining. This had never happened before. Soon, there were so many people on the streets, and they all said they were going to Tahrir Square, so we followed them. As we gathered there, so did the police, and I thought, okay, I'm going to be filming a big crackdown and some mass arrests now. But all of a sudden, thousands of people came pouring into Tahrir Square, chanting for freedom. The police fought with everything they had, but they were overwhelmed. There were bricks flying over my head, there was tear gas in the air, and then an extraordinary thing happened. The police turned and ran. It was a seminal moment. People had lost their fear. It was such an exhilarating and hopeful time, and no one knew what was going to happen moment to moment. But the people were struggling for freedom, and you had to root for them. I continued to cover the so-called Arab Spring, and then later, sadly, the violent army crackdowns across the region. If there's something I learned about working in the Middle East, it's how we should not take our democracy for granted. It's something we have to constantly fight for and push the boundaries to maintain the rights that we do have. When people in Tahrir Square were united, nothing could stop them. President Hosni Mubarak stood down after decades of rule, following just 2 weeks of protest. Of course, this wasn't the end of the story. One man is not the system. But it was when people became divided that they were defeated, along with their dreams of freedom. I remember in Tahrir Square, you had liberal girls wearing tight jeans and smoking in political conversation with religious Salafi men with their long beards and jalabiyas, unlikely allies. Socialists and the Muslim Brotherhood, normally enemies, stood side by side and protected each other against a repressive regime. Tahrir Square was truly a people's parliament and showed the dream of not just what Egypt could become, but the promise of what we could all reach when people unite. So many countries today, including America, seem so irrevocably divided. But I believe unity is possible, even amongst the most unlikely of peoples and ideas. I've seen it. But here in the US and across Europe, it seems like we're becoming more polarized with the rise of the far right and the far left. And it's a worrying time for sure. Britain is leaving the European Union, the right is on the ascent in France, autocracy is on the rise in Turkey, the Middle East is at war, Europe and America's reaction to the refugee crisis in Syria has been to shut out as many as they can and build a fortress around their borders. And one thing I will say about victims of terror attacks is that the majority are Muslims living in the Middle East. But I do think that the majority of people supporting extreme positions around the world are closer in agreement than at first glance. I might be an optimist. I think what people are most exercised about is growing inequality, powerlessness, and fear. They want to obviously take very different paths in solving those problems. But perhaps if we understand the root problems, it might allow us to find other, less extreme solutions. I believe minds are like parachutes. They only work when they're open. Your education here in international studies has given you the tools to navigate these circumstances. It's allowed you to go beyond your borders and see the world from another perspective, which is something that you can use to enrich the communities you live and work in, wherever they are. Your inquiring minds and open ears will be able to rationalize and find commonalities that can unite people. The only advice that I can add to this is to keep an open heart too, and don't let fear be a driving force when it comes to making decisions. I think this will allow the people you meet from all over the world to trust you and tell you what they really think. Because sometimes I think people only tell you what they think you want to hear, especially when you're coming from a rich and powerful nation like we do. Building trust is a precious thing when it comes to forging relationships and opening dialogue. That's what's key to combating extremism in all its many guises and finding solutions to people's problems. Of course, you're going out into the world to work for and help other people. But always keep your ears open, I'd say, because you might not always know the answers and solutions. Maybe instead, the people you're going to help will teach you something. For example, there was this community in Malawi which had a visit from some student engineers. The villagers had asked the engineers for a cell phone tower. No, you don't need a cell phone tower, the engineers said. What you really need is a water filtration system, and that's what we're going to build you. So the engineering students started building a rain catchment system, and the village men were helping. Then one morning, when they woke up, all the men were gone. They found out they'd all gone to work in South Africa for several months. The student's translator overheard the women talking to each other, saying, "If only we had cell phones, we could call our men and dissuade them from sleeping with prostitutes while we are away working. Then they wouldn't come back and give us HIV." So it turned out the cell phone tower was not just a shallow desire, but came from a real place of need. So things are not always what they seem. In my work as a journalist, I always listen to ordinary people and their stories to learn about what's going on in the country I'm in. And often my preconceived ideas are challenged. For example, all you hear about Yemen is how dangerous and radical it is. But I've never met such kind people who have been through and continue to go through so much hardship. When I was last in the capital, Sana'a, a couple of years ago, there was a lack of everything in the city: food, water, medicine, and the lines for gas were miles long. And obviously it's way worse now. But at that time, the Yemeni culture of extending hospitality still remained, and they shared whatever, or they offered whatever they could to us. So it's the memory that has stayed with me. Another time, I made a documentary about rhino poaching in South Africa, which is obviously a heinous crime. I spent some time with an anti-poaching unit who would shoot poachers if they came into contact with them. But what I was surprised to find out is how they didn't really feel this was actually the right way to be dealing with the situation. They felt the situation was rooted in poverty and racism. They said conservation was racist because only white men owned land and owned all the animals in South Africa. They said black people were shut out of their own environments, unable to afford a visit to a game reserve. Most of the locals live in abject poverty, and perhaps if they had a greater stake in protecting the animals, they would. When I went over the border into Mozambique and met some poachers, I felt inclined to agree. The poachers lived in stick huts and wanted to hunt rhino because it enabled them to buy cows, chickens, and build a concrete home. And who was I to sit in judgment? These were just the poachers, of course, not the mafia who were running the whole operation, the whole trade. I mean, they're rich, and they're not doing it for survival. But still, it was an eye-opener to spend time with poachers who remind me how rarely anything is black and white. In work, you're going to be navigating these shades of gray, and your education will have enabled you to see the nuances. I graduated a really, really long time ago, which makes me really old. But I'm still pursuing my dreams, which have changed over the years from working in news to wanting to work in documentary film. The University of Michigan, through the Knight-Wallace Journalism Fellowship, has helped me follow this new path. While here, I got to take classes and started making a film about Flint and the Navajo Nation and Standing Rock. I have to say that every time I was in class, I was really impressed with all the students. I mean, you all work so hard, much harder than I think I ever did at university. Everyone I met was really smart and bright. So all you parents out there have to be all really proud of your children. They're intelligent and impressive adults. Being here has been a real learning experience for me. That's right, the learning never stops, even at my age. So embrace the fact that even though you're graduating today, you'll always be a student of life. You'll be challenged in the workplace, but I do urge you to remain true to your principles because the world needs more people with high principles and ideals. One last thought is that your career doesn't happen overnight. In my experience, Whatever you want, it takes much longer than you think it's going to. So relax, don't put yourselves under too much pressure to achieve your goals, and enjoy the journey getting there, because it's as important as the destination. And remember to stay true to yourselves and the intentions you had going into your professions. It might be a harder path, but it's bound to be a more fulfilling one. So go forth, have some adventures of your own, break the rules, and leave the world a more interesting place for you being here. Thank you very much.